When I was little, my brother Marcus, my sister Sophie, and I used to squeeze into one tiny bed in our small house in Ohio. We would whisper stories to each other until we fell asleep. I always believed that no matter how hard things got, we would stay together forever. But on a cold winter morning when I was 9 years old, my whole world shattered in a way I never could have imagined. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from today. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to follow my journey through the darkest valley to the other side. Our little house in Dayton, Ohio, had only 2 bedrooms, but it felt like home. The paint was peeling off the walls, and the front porch creaked whenever you stepped on it. But none of that mattered to me back then. My father Daniel worked as a mechanic at a local auto shop. He was a quiet man who showed his love through actions rather than words. I remember how his hands were always stained with grease, and how he would ruffle my hair when he came home from work. My mother Patricia worked as a cashier at a grocery store downtown. She was always tired, always stressed about bills and money. Looking back now, I understand why she snapped at us so easily. But as a child, I just wanted her to smile more. Marcus was 2 years older than me. He had this protective instinct that made me feel safe wherever we went. At school, if anyone looked at me the wrong way, Marcus would step in front of me like a shield. Sophie was 3 years younger than me, just a tiny thing with curly brown hair and big, curious eyes. Every night I would brush her hair and tell her fairy tales about princesses who found their happily ever after. We did not have much, but we had each other. I remember our family dinners around that wobbly kitchen table. Mom would make mac and cheese from a box, and Dad would tell us about the cars he fixed that day. Those moments felt warm and safe. But as I got older, I started noticing things. The whispered arguments after we went to bed. The way Mom and Dad stopped looking at each other. The tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The winter I turned 9 years old, the storm finally came. Mom and Dad sat us down on our old brown sofa. Their faces were cold and distant, like strangers wearing my parents' masks. Dad cleared his throat and said they were getting a divorce. I did not fully understand what that word meant, but I knew it was bad. I looked at Marcus, and he grabbed my hand tight. Then came the part that destroyed everything. Dad said he was moving to Indiana to work at his cousin's garage. He could only take one of us. He chose Marcus because Marcus was the oldest boy and could help around the shop. Mom said she was moving back to Kentucky to live with Grandma. The house was small, only room for 2 people. She chose Sophie because Sophie was the youngest and needed her mother the most. I sat there frozen, waiting for someone to say my name, waiting for someone to choose me. But nobody did. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest. What about me? The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Mom finally said I would stay with Aunt Janet for a while, just until things got settled. She made it sound temporary, like a few weeks at most. I believed her because I needed to believe her. 1 week later, Dad came to pick up Marcus. I hugged my brother so tight I thought I might never let go. He promised me he would call every single day. He said we would see each other soon. I watched him climb into Dad's old pickup truck, and I waved until the truck disappeared down the street. 2 days after that, Mom loaded Sophie into her car. My baby sister was crying and reaching her little hands toward me through the window. I ran after that car as fast as my legs could carry me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I stood in the middle of the street watching the car become a tiny dot, and then nothing at all. Aunt Janet was Mom's younger sister. She lived in a cramped apartment that smelled like cigarette smoke. At first, she tried to be nice to me. She let me sleep on her couch and gave me cereal for breakfast. But after 3 weeks, she sat me down and told me she could not keep me anymore. She said she was having money problems and could not afford another mouth to feed. I asked her where I would go. She just shook her head and picked up the phone. She called social services. The day the social worker came, I stood outside Aunt Janet's apartment with a small bag holding everything I owned. A few clothes, a stuffed rabbit that Sophie had given me, a photograph of our family from better times. The social worker was a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson. She smiled at me, but her smile did not reach her eyes. She opened the back door of her car, and I climbed in. That was the day I entered the foster care system. I was 9 years old, and I had just learned that to my own family, I was the one worth leaving behind. My first foster home was with the Thompson family in a suburb of Columbus. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were an older couple with gray hair and a big house. When I first arrived, I thought maybe things would be okay. They gave me my own room on the second floor. It was small, but it had a bed and a window that looked out at a maple tree. Mrs. Thompson made me cookies on my first night there, but the kindness did not last. Within weeks, I realized the Thompsons only cared about one thing: the monthly check they received for fostering me. They started giving me smaller portions at meals. They made me do heavy chores that no 9-year-old should do. I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees. I washed dishes that were piled up for days. I cleaned bathrooms until my fingers cracked and bled. Every week I wrote letters, one to Dad, one to Mom, one to Marcus, one to Sophie. I told them about my new school and the maple tree outside my window. I asked them when they were coming to get me. I waited by the mailbox every day hoping for a response, but the mailbox stayed empty. No one ever wrote back. At school, I was the weird foster kid who wore clothes that were too big and too old. I did not have money for hot lunch, so I ate whatever scraps the Thompsons packed for me, usually just a stale sandwich and an apple that was going soft. Other kids noticed. They whispered and pointed. I learned to eat quickly and alone. After 6 months, a social worker made a surprise visit and noticed how thin I had gotten. She saw the blisters on my hands and asked me questions that I was too scared to answer honestly. But she must have seen enough because the next week, I was moved to a different home. The Harris family in Cleveland was my second foster home. There were 4 other foster children living there already, and I was just another body taking up space. I shared a bedroom with 3 other girls. We had 2 bunk beds pushed against opposite walls, and there was barely room to walk between them. One of the girls was named Brianna. She was 15 years old and had been in the system since she was 6. The system had made her hard and mean. She took whatever she wanted from the rest of us: food, clothes, anything she decided should be hers. When I tried to stand up to her, once she shoved me against the wall and told me that nobody would believe the new girl over her. I learned to survive by becoming invisible. I spoke only when spoken to. I kept my head down. I made myself small and quiet so nobody would notice me. It was the only way to get through each day without becoming a target. After a year with this Harris family, they announced they were moving to another state. They were not taking any of the foster children with them. Just like that, I was packed up and shipped off again. I was 11 years old and already on my third home. My third foster home was with a single woman named Mrs. Eleanor in Akron. She was in her 60s, with white hair and shaky hands. At first, I thought she might be kind, but I quickly learned that Mrs. Eleanor had a problem with alcohol. She would start drinking in the afternoon and be passed out on the couch by evening. Most nights, she forgot to make dinner. I taught myself how to cook from whatever I could find in her nearly empty refrigerator: scrambled eggs, canned soup, crackers with peanut butter. One night, Mrs. Eleanor was stumbling around drunk and fell down the stairs. I heard the crash and found her lying at the bottom, not moving. I called 911 with shaking hands. The ambulance came and took her away. She never came back to that house. They put her in a nursing facility, and I was moved again. By the time I was 13, I had lived in 5 different foster homes. Each one had taught me the same lesson: do not trust anyone. Do not get attached. Do not expect anyone to stay. I had become cold and closed off. My grades dropped because I could not focus on school when I was always worried about where I would sleep next month. I ended up in a group home, a big building full of kids that nobody wanted. We slept in rooms with 6 beds each. The walls were painted that sad institutional beige color. Everything smelled like industrial cleaner. I kept to myself, spending most of my time sitting alone in the small backyard, staring at the sky, and wondering if anyone in the world remembered I existed. One evening, I was sitting out there when an older woman walked up to me. Her name was Martha, and she volunteered at the group home tutoring kids who were falling behind in school. She had silver hair and warm brown eyes that actually looked at me, not through me. She asked what I was reading, and when I told her nothing because I did not have any books, she came back the next week with a whole bag of novels for me. Martha started tutoring me every week. She was patient and encouraging even when I got frustrated and wanted to give up. She saw something in me that I could not see in myself. One day she said something that changed my life. She told me that I did not get to choose where I started, but I had the power to choose where I would end up. Those words planted a seed in me. For the first time in years, I started to believe that maybe my story did not have to end in tragedy. When I was 15, I was placed with my final foster family. Their names were Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, a retired couple living in Cincinnati. Mr. Henderson had been a history teacher, and Mrs. Henderson had worked as a nurse. Their own children were grown and living in other states, and they had decided to open their home to foster kids who needed stability. From the first day I walked through their door, something felt different. Mrs. Henderson showed me to my room, a real room with a bed that was just mine, a desk for studying, and curtains with little flowers on them. She asked me what my favorite foods were, and actually wrote down my answers. Mr. Henderson shook my hand like I was an adult worthy of respect. I kept waiting for the catch. I kept waiting for them to reveal their true colors like all the others had. But weeks turned into months, and the Hendersons just kept being kind. They made sure I had 3 meals a day. They helped me with my homework. They came to my school events, sitting in the audience like real parents. For the first time since I was 9 years old, I felt safe enough to breathe. And with that safety came a fierce determination. I decided that I was going to make something of myself. I was going to prove that the little girl everyone had thrown away was worth something after all. I threw myself into my studies. I joined the debate club and discovered that I had a voice, and I knew how to use it. I started writing for the school newspaper, telling stories about underdogs who beat the odds. I stayed up late studying for tests and woke up early to review my notes. Education became my ladder, and I was going to climb out of the hole my family had dropped me into. I stayed in touch with Martha through letters and phone calls. She became like a grandmother to me, always encouraging me, always believing in me. When I told her I wanted to go to college, she helped me research scholarships for kids who had aged out of foster care. Senior year, I applied to Ohio State University. The day I got my acceptance letter with a full scholarship, I cried for an hour. Mrs. Henderson baked me a cake, and Mr. Henderson gave me a history book about women who had changed the world. He told me he expected to see my name in a book like that someday. College was a whole new world. I chose to study social work because I wanted to help kids who had been through what I had been through. I wanted to be the person I had needed when I was 9 years old, and everyone had abandoned me. I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover my living expenses, one at the campus library and one at a coffee shop near my dorm. My roommate was a girl named Denise from Pittsburgh. She came from a big, loving family that gathered for every holiday and called each other every Sunday. At first, being around her made me feel the absence of my own family even more sharply. But Denise had a heart big enough to share. She invited me home for Thanksgiving that first year. Her mother hugged me at the door like she had known me my whole life. Her father asked about my classes and actually listened to my answers. Her little brothers argued over who got to sit next to me at dinner. That Thanksgiving, sitting around a table overflowing with food and laughter, I finally understood what a real family felt like. It was not about blood. It was about people who showed up for you, people who made space for you at their table. I graduated from college with honors. A nonprofit organization in Columbus hired me as a social worker, and I finally had a career that meant something. By the time I was 25, I had my own apartment for the first time in my life. It was small, just a studio with a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. I paid my own rent. I bought my own groceries. I built a life with my own 2 hands. At work, I became an advocate for children in foster care. I fought for kids who had been shuffled from home to home like I had been. I made sure their voices were heard, that they were not forgotten by the system. Every child I helped felt like a small victory against the injustice that had shaped my own childhood. I started dating a man named James, who worked at the same organization. He was kind and patient, and he never pushed me to talk about my past until I was ready. When I finally told him everything, he held my hand and said that my past did not define me. He said that the woman I had become was someone worth knowing. By 28, my life was good. Really good. I had a job I loved, an apartment that felt like home, and a man who loved me for exactly who I was. I still visited the Hendersons every month. I still called Martha every Sunday. They were my family now, the family I had chosen and who had chosen me back. As for my biological family, I had made peace with their absence. I stopped waiting for letters that would never come. I stopped hoping for phone calls that would never be made. I accepted that they did not want me in their lives, and I learned to be okay with that. Then one evening, everything changed. I was sitting on my couch after a long day at work when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. Someone named Marcus Thompson had sent me a message request. My heart stopped. Thompson was my mother maiden name, the name my brother would have if Dad had never given him our family name. I opened the message with trembling fingers. It said, "Ella, this is Marcus, your brother. I have been looking for you for years. I miss you so much. I want to see you again." I stared at those words until they blurred. 19 years of silence, and now 3 sentences on a screen. I did not know what to feel. I did not respond that night. I needed time to process. 2 days later, Marcus sent another message, this time with his phone number and address. He said that Dad wanted to reconnect with me too. He said the whole family wanted to make things right. The whole family. As if we had ever been a whole family. As if they had not shattered us into pieces and scattered us to the wind. A week after that, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. It was my mother, Patricia. Her voice sounded older, shakier than I remembered. She was crying before she even finished saying my name. She told me she had regretted leaving me every single day. She said life in Kentucky had been hard. Grandma had died just 2 years after they moved there. Mom had struggled to raise Sophie alone, working double shifts just to keep food on the table. She said she had thought about me constantly, but did not know how to find me, did not know where the system had placed me. Now Sophie was 25 years old. She was married with a baby of her own, and she wanted to meet her big sister. Mom begged me to give them a chance. She swore things would be different now. I listened without saying much. Inside, I was a hurricane of emotions, anger, pain. And buried beneath all that, a tiny flicker of hope that I hated myself for feeling. When she finally stopped talking, I asked her the only question that mattered. Why now? Why, after almost 20 years? She went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Because I was too much of a coward to look for you sooner." A few days later, Dad called me through Marcus' phone. His voice was gruff the way I remembered it, but tired too. He told me that Indiana had not worked out. The repair shop went bankrupt. He had bounced from job to job for years. He admitted that he had thought about me many times, but he had never had the money to support another child. And then he said something that hit me like a punch to the stomach. He told me they had known, both of them. Mom and Dad had found out I was in foster care just a few months after the divorce. Social services had contacted them, given them the chance to take me back, and neither one of them had come. They had both chosen their new lives over their daughter. They had known I was alone in the system, and they had left me there. I agreed to meet them. Not because I wanted a reunion, but because I needed to look them in the eyes and say what I had been holding inside for 2 decades. We met at a coffee shop in Columbus, neutral territory. When I walked in, I saw them sitting at a large table in the corner. Dad looked older, his hair mostly gray now. Mom had deep lines around her eyes. Marcus was a grown man, tall and broad-shouldered. Sophie was there too, a young woman with the same curly brown hair I used to brush when she was 3 years old. They all stood up when they saw me. Mom started crying immediately. Sophie reached out like she wanted to hug me. Marcus just stared at me with tears in his eyes. I did not hug any of them. I sat down across from them and waited. They took turns apologizing. Dad said he was sorry he had not fought harder to keep the family together. Mom said she was sorry she had made the wrong choice. Marcus said he had begged Dad to go back for me, but Dad had always said we could not afford it. Sophie said she barely remembered me, but she had always felt like something was missing. I listened to all of it. And then I spoke. I told them about the Thompson house where I scrubbed floors until my hands bled. I told them about Brianna at the Harris home who stole my food and shoved me against walls. I told them about Mrs. Eleanor passed out drunk while I taught myself to cook so I would not starve. I told them about the group home where I was just another unwanted kid in a building full of unwanted kids. I told them about the letters I had written. Dozens of letters that none of them ever answered. I told them about standing by the mailbox day after day, waiting for someone to tell me I was not forgotten. Then I looked at each of them one by one. I said that I had spent almost 20 years rebuilding myself from the ashes they had left behind. I was not the 9-year-old girl standing in the street watching their cars drive away anymore. I had found my own family, people who had chosen me when my own blood had not. They did not get to come back now after all this time and demand a place in my life just because they had finally decided they were ready. I stood up from that table. I looked at my mother and father and brother and sister, and I felt something shift inside me. Not hatred, not even anger anymore, just a quiet, powerful certainty. I walked out of that coffee shop, and I did not look back. The days after that meeting were hard. I cried more than I had cried in years. I talked to James about everything, and he held me while I processed 2 decades of abandoned grief. I called Denise, and she drove 3 hours just to sit with me and eat ice cream on my couch. I called Martha, and she said something that helped me more than anything else. She told me that setting boundaries to protect my peace was the bravest thing a person could do. I decided to write a letter, not to my biological family, but to myself, to the 9-year-old girl I used to be. I told her that what happened was not her fault. I told her that she was worthy of love even if the people who should have loved her the most had failed her. I told her that she would grow up to be strong and kind and successful. I told her that she would find her people, and they would never leave her behind. Writing that letter broke something open in me. I cried until I had no tears left. But when I was done, I felt lighter than I had in years. I felt free. 1 year later, I married James in a small ceremony at a park in Columbus. The Hendersons were there in the front row. Martha sat right beside them, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Denise was my maid of honor, crying happy tears before I even started walking down the aisle. My coworkers filled the other seats, people who had become my chosen family over the years. There was no one from my biological family at my wedding, and I was at peace with that. Standing at the altar, looking at the faces of everyone who had shown up for me, I finally understood something important. Family is not about who you share blood with. Family is about who stays, who shows up, who chooses you over and over again, even when it is hard. I learned that forgiveness does not mean letting people back into your life so they can hurt you again. Sometimes forgiveness means releasing the anger that has been weighing you down while still keeping your distance from the people who caused the pain. You can forgive someone and still choose not to have them in your life. That is not cruelty. That is self-preservation. The little girl who was left behind all those years ago finally found her way home. It just turned out that home was not the place she thought it would be. Home was the family she built with her own heart. Home was the people who proved through their actions that she was worth loving. And that, I think, is the most beautiful kind of home there is. If this story touched you, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who hurt you? Have you found your chosen family? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they are worthy of love, no matter what their family made them believe. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope you always remember that your past does not define your future. You have the power to write your own story. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.